Let's forward to the next slide. Hi, everybody. I'm Kristen Fontachero from the University of Michigan School of Information, and along with Project Director Dr. Lucy Santos Green of the University of South Carolina and Dr. Melissa P. Johnston of the University of West Georgia, I'm delighted to welcome you to the second of 3 webinars launching our 3-year project, Online Ready. If you missed Amanda Jones' session last week, you can find it on our YouTube channel, and I'll post the link after this introduction. Our project director, Lucy Green, conceived of Online Ready to support school librarians in developing and enacting culturally responsive pedagogy online. And thanks to funding from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, our 3-year research project to develop that PD kicks off this fall with these webinars. Now, this is where you come in to develop the kind of PD that school librarians need and want. We need your input. So throughout this webinar, we're going to ask you for your take on the tools, strategies, mindset, challenges, and more from your own pandemic and online learning and teaching front lines. So this session is being recorded, and your feedback will be anonymized and used to guide our planning for a summer 2022 professional development cohort. And I'll be back in the last moments of the session to tell you more about that. So we encourage you throughout the session to give us your thoughts in the chat, and make sure that chat button is set to everyone so that we can all see it. Also, project manager Liz Hartnett will be in touch a day or 2 after this live event with certificates for attending tonight's session live, a follow-up survey, and a link to the archived session. Tonight, you're going to hear about cultural competence and navigating online K-12 librarianship from 2 highly regarded practitioners, Amanda Jones, an award-winning 5th and 6th grade librarian from Denham Springs, Louisiana, and the wonderful Erika Long, school librarian with the Metro Nashville Public Schools. I'll let them tell you more about them momentarily, but I'll quickly share 2 endorsements about their work. Amanda's mentee, Kelsey Bowden, has said of her, I could list 100 things Amanda has done that are perfectly amazing. She's the most talented, hardworking, helpful, generous, and knowledgeable librarian I've ever met. And here's one from Erika's principal when she was at 3rd grade Marshall Elementary. Our librarian has such great relationships with some students. She may be the only adult in the building that some of these students have that they feel they can talk to. It's making a tremendous difference in our school. And now I'll turn it over to you, Amanda and Erika.
Hello, everybody. This is us right here. I'll let Erika, she can talk to you and introduce herself, and then I'll say something, then we'll move on and start on the discussion.
Well, thank you. Good evening. I hope you are all doing well, and thank you, Kristen, for such kind words that you pulled from people who we've worked with in the past. That's amazing. Again, I'm Erika Long. I am a secondary librarian. I call myself secondary librarian because I've worked at both the middle school and high school grade bands. And this year I was crazy enough to make the journey back to high school. I am in Nashville, Tennessee, and have been here for, this is year 5, and this is my 8th year in education as a career shift for the 3rd time. And we'll get to talking about what my library looks like in terms of our content today a little bit later in the presentation.
And my name is Amanda Jones. I am a 21-year educator. I've been at the same school for 21 years. I went to middle school there, and like I always joke, they're just going to bury me out behind the gym because I feel like I've been there my whole life. But I love it. And I'm in a very small town with 2 red lights. I am a 5th and 6th grade librarian. So every child in our community will go up through my school, pass through from, to heading from elementary to me in middle school, then to junior high. Our contact information is on the screen. You can follow us on Twitter. And I'm going to move on to the next slide. And this slide, I thought it was really important that this quote, to be brave enough to start a conversation that matters, because I know that I get uncomfortable sometimes, but I think it's healthy to be uncomfortable, because you're not going to learn unless you're willing to be in those uncomfortable conversations. I will say as a precursor that because I have been at the same school for 21 years, where I work with people that taught me, and I now work with people I taught and I went to school with. I am very comfortable in my position within my school and my district. So there are librarians in my district that are not as comfortable talking about some of the things we're going to be talking about, and some of the things that I do in my library that they're maybe scared to do. So we're going to touch on that a little bit. Okay, so before Eric and I start talking, we want to know what you think. And so what does a culturally responsive school, what does culturally responsive school librarianship look to you? So how does it look to you? So I have a Jamboard, and I am going to copy that link. Oh, it's Krista put it in already for us. So if you could click on the link and go in and just take a little sticky note on here and type in what you think culturally responsive school librarian means to you. And this is where I have to remember my wait time, Erica, because I rush it.
Listen, they're in there, so they're thinking.
Yeah. I feel like I have to like keep talking till it's just
We should play Jeopardy music.
I'm ready for Lamar Burton to take over Jeopardy. LeVar Burton to step up and be the
Is
host.
he going to do it? I think he backed out. Did he not?
Oh, did he turn it down?
I think so. I don't know.
He liked my
happened,
tweet
but
last week. I tweeted something that he liked. I framed
He's
it.
amazing.
I printed it out and framed it. All right, so I am not seeing us. Oh, there it is. Okay.
Kristen. First one is really important that I see. Oh, we gotta move them around. Okay.
I think they were, some of them were hidden. Okay.
There we go. Awesome. So I'm going to touch on one of the ones that I see in here, honoring and celebrating students' identities. Going to talk about that a little later.
And if anybody else wants to add to our Jamboard, don't be shy. Because we can't tell who's right. Sometimes I'm like, people are going to judge me by what I put.
They're all animals, so.
Yeah, I can't tell who's putting what.
Although I could relate that to literature and most books, more books being about animals than there are about people of color, but I won't do that today.
Somebody just posted that chart again on one of the Facebook groups today. The latest infographic.
I need to go find it. I haven't seen the latest one yet, so it must have just come out.
Well, it was older still. I think the latest was still a couple of years old. Like it was.
Oh, they must not have done them anymore then. I
Okay.
think the last one I saw was 2019.
Yeah, I think that's what this one was. Okay, do we have enough, you think, that we can start talking about it?
Let's good.
Okay. All right, move that one around. You can see it. Okay, Erica, do you want to talk about any of these first?
Yes. So I want to go ahead and highlight well, let's see how they tie into each other. Representing and reflecting all people, right? And then honoring and celebrating students' identities and tying that to using examples that reflect different cultures of students in your teaching. Those are all interconnected, but they are really important, right? One of the things that I have tried to do in every school that I've been in is make sure that there are representations either in my programs, well, not either, but in my programs, also in the collection, whether it's digital, print, what have you, that reflects all of the different cultures in my building. I have had the privilege of working in schools. Kristen used a quote from a video earlier from my previous school, Thurgood Marshall Middle School, and that school is extremely diverse. We had over 20 languages spoken in that building of 1,000 students. And so we have kids from all over the place. But one of the things that really excited us about coming to school each day is because those cultures are always celebrated. Students had assignments, like their regular assignments in the classroom. We always made sure to mix in, like, what can you teach your peers about what it is, about something about your culture, whether it was the foods that they eat or what they do for activities, or what types of holidays they celebrate, or the languages that they speak, which is really cool when you have a classroom of students who speak so many different languages. They can all teach little phrases that kids their age say on a regular basis. So all of those things are extremely important, because it not only makes your student, that child, feel like, oh, like, I can relate to this. Like, oh, that's me. The same way we say that we can see that in a book. Oh, well, that's me on this test. Like, this teacher used a name or an event that I might happen to do or my family participates in, as a way of learning in the classroom. And so not only does that student feel included and is more engaged because they see and experience instruction that mirrors their identity, but also your other students in the classrooms get to be exposed to a lot more than they typically would in some of the curriculums that we see on an everyday basis.
And I like that you mentioned the exposure, because I was looking at this one right here that I now drew all over, representing everyone. My school is 96% white. And I feel like they're not exposed to anything other than our community is like white Christian, like we're in Louisiana, and but we have students of other religions and cultures and languages, and I want to expose our students. Well, first I want those students that are not to, that don't fall into that category of the 96% white. I want them I want them to feel represented. And I want to make sure that, and somebody else put it, I want them to factual information, but I want to expose my students to other cultures, because a lot of them, we're not a very affluent community, so they do not have means to travel. So a lot of them they're going to live here forever. And so like, they're not going to see, I want them to be exposed to outside different cultures and languages as much as I can. So what does it look like in each of our libraries? I think we both talked about that, and we're going to be talking about that some more. Thank you to everybody for commenting on the Jamboard. So discussion. So when we start,
Sorry.
Oh no.
Can you go back for me one time?
Yes.
I turned my mic on mute, and so it took me a minute to hop back in here. But I want to touch on something. We talked about how it encompasses, I think for the most part, we talked about cultures, but thinking about languages, religion, ableness versus disabled, all those types of things, mental illness, especially with these huge pushes for social emotional learning in the buildings. It's really important, especially because I've seen even today at school, oh my goodness, like I had to share a personal story about previous kids who had tragedy because I saw domestic violence happening in my library. And so I immediately have to call a principal, but I share that story with them because I don't want them to be in that situation. Like this, explain, this is a trigger for me, right? And we continue to talk about social emotional learning in our classrooms. And so let's make sure like Mental health is talked about because I have kids who were in middle school and had anxiety, and other people were looking at them like, what is, so teaching moments, right? That kid who has anxiety or experiences anxiety in testing situations or just everyday life doesn't feel so excluded because other people are looking at them like, what's wrong with you? But I'm teaching them like, this is a normal thing. Like, hi, I'm Miss Long, but I have anxiety as well. So giving them that kind of that whole child experience in terms of thinking about what culturally responsive school librarianship look like. And then I want to add that learning isn't just in our instructional opportunities, right? I think part of that gets a little muddy because we're always talking about teachers going to professional learning opportunities to talk about and learn more about culturally responsive teaching. But in the library, everything in the library is teaching and learning, right? Whether it's passive or not. And so think about what that looks like if you, for instance, have a makerspace. How does your makerspace show that you are providing opportunities for kids to see other students' lived experiences in those different activities?
And you brought up, you were talking about mental illness and anxiety and things like that. And it made me think of our LGBTQA IA plus students as well. I want them to feel included. I've shared with, my students are a little young, they're 5th and 6th grade, but we've had to have some teachable moments, and I've had to tell them, I've lost former students to suicide who were members of that community, and they felt left out in our community. And so I don't want to lose another student to that. So I want to be there to help our students, whether they're having, they're in the LGBTQ plus community, include that as well in the discussion, which can be touchy with some parents, especially because they're like, well, your kids are only 5th and 6th grade. I'm like, yes, but we have all of these students in our library. And so you want to talk to your community. You want to, I think sometimes there's some confusion in the community, especially if your community has like rants and raves Facebook pages like mine does, and they all get on and discuss. Sometimes there's some confusion with what culturally responsive teaching is. I think it's because it's got that CRT with critical race theory. And I know my own parents, I've had to have this discussion with my own parents about that. It's not the same thing. And you have to build awareness. You have to teach your community, whether it's your students, your parents, the community at large, that there is a difference and we're not talking about the same thing. And I'm going to let Erika expand on this, but I wanted to say that I had talked to Erika about how, I said, like, I feel like the heart of this confusion is fear and misunderstanding. And Erika said to me, like she pointed out, or it could be the desire not to accept history to its fullest. And I was embarrassed that had to be pointed out to me because I have different experiences than Erika has. But it's okay. I'm still learning. But I think my point is we're all still learning. But sometimes it can be right in your face and you don't see it. And I tend to think that I'm trying, but I'm still learning. So I'm gonna let Erika talk about this slide now.
Yeah, I mean, you summed it up. One of the biggest things is for us as educators, excuse me, especially as librarians, right? Because we are for the keeper of books or knowledge, but we should be ready at all times, especially because book challenges and curriculum challenges come immediately to us if they haven't gone through a principal first, right? So making sure that we have clear, defined understanding of the difference between those two. And I will say, when you hear culturally responsive teaching, that can be used interchangeably, or it has been used interchangeably with culturally relevant teaching, as when we think about including culturally relevant text, right? but it is completely different from critical race theory. And I know that Amanda made some notes earlier on when we first started working on this about where CRT, critical race theory, originated, right? And if you hear me say CRT, that is all I'm talking about. I will sound out culturally responsive teaching, right? But you know, its origin is from legal classes, right? Law classes, higher graduate level law classes, or higher level undergraduate courses. So it's, you know, and it's built specifically around one thing, right? The history of the legal system and what roles racism played in it. But when we think about culturally responsive teaching, we are thinking about what are those things that relate to our learners? What are those things we're pulling in from their experiences, their own lived experiences, that we're implementing into our everyday practices in our classrooms, in our libraries, because that is what we need to do to help to make sure that they continue to be engaged. When they don't see those things, that's when they're starting to shut down, because they don't feel as though they exist in those moments. And going back to Amanda's point, where she says, you know, I wish you didn't feel embarrassed, because like I told you before, you own it and you're always learning. But there are opportunities for us to learn, right? What happens is that, yes, there's some fear, but also there's just this this desire not to know by so many different people. They don't want to own the history. So if I'm a student here, and I can say so many times, like, why am I an adult when I learned about the Tulsa Race Massacre? That's crazy to me, right? Why am I an adult when I learned about Juneteenth? That's insane. And so giving our learners the opportunity to be exposed, because we are the educators, we're the ones there with 8 hours a day, making sure that we are providing those opportunities where they can see the history taught correctly, blended in with ways to discuss, like, how does that relate? What are the correlations with their current day and what they are seeing in our society? I don't care how old they are. There are ways that we can do it. There are so many amazing picture books. So your kindergartners, preschoolers, second graders can still get touches of that history, because they're talking about history. Like, we have to move away from whitewashing it and owning it. So when your parents or other school community members or whoever comes to you with these questions, making sure that you can say, okay, this is what we're doing, like point blank period. And you can lay it out. Hey, would you like to come in? If your school allows for that. But just making sure that you can stand firm on knowing that culturally responsive teaching is not critical race theory.
And I think sometimes I get really angry. I get really angry, and I've had to learn to not just, I get really angry. I'm like, I don't understand how there's a confusion. But then I start looking at some of the posts and things on social media that people in my community are making. They have totally at some point confused not only culturally responsive thinking with CRT. They're now mixing in social emotional learning, the word equity. And so I feel that as the librarian who I'm trying to help share knowledge and resources, I think that I am responsible for, in a way, making sure that my students understand the difference, but also that my parents in my community understand the differences in that. So in the chat, I would like you to share some examples of what you do in your program to make sure all students are included. So let us know in the chat. Make sure you use the chat feature and not the Q&A. But please share in the chat some examples of what you do in your program to make sure all students feel included.
Sherry, I love that. I need to work on that.
We just got to open up before school. I just got to open the library up before school this week for the first time since March 2020.
Mm.
So they're going to have more access. I'm excited about that. Recognize holidays and observances, your collection, diversity book club, ask questions, get to know kids and families. Make sure collections. I lost it. It went by too fast.
I know, right?
Make sure collections reflect and include diverse perspectives and cultures. Let's see. Talk with students about what they want the library to be. Okay, and I'm going to say this, and it's going to tie into something I'm going to point out later. So I had a former, well, everybody's put in the chat. I had a former student who I taught who's now in her early 20s, and she is going to college to be a teacher. And so she comes and subs at our school. And she walked in the library. I taught her 7th grade ELA, and she came back to visit me on her planning period when she was subbing. And she walked in the library and she just like walked around, and she said, "It's so different now." And she is I'm trying to think, her family is from Peru, and she said point blank to me, "Miss Jones, we didn't have books with people my color on the front of the books when I went to school here." And I was mortified, actually, to be honest with you. I wasn't the librarian then, but I was just mortified that, like, I've never had to think about that. And it was like eye-opening to me that I had never had to think about it because I'm white and all of the books had white characters. And I just, it just didn't cross my mind until she pointed that out to me. And it was, it shook me. And so that was 3 years ago. And it still shakes me to think that a child would walk into my library and not feel like they saw any books with someone that they could identify with. It hurt my heart. Let's see, in the chat, I've been doing focus groups, create digital and physical book displays, commit to having at least half of my read alouds. Yes, intentionally creating diverse. I skim read. Try to do all the programming during school hours and have video conferencing available. Make sure materials are all featured. Okay. Project Lit. I love Project Lit. And I love Read Woke. Cicely Lewis's Read Woke and Project Lit are both really good programs. Have asked 5th and 6th grade to start identity webs and then highlight some of their identities throughout the year by displaying more titles about. So in the discussion, it says we're going to talk about, how as we as librarians make sure all students in our school feel included. And I have a student that identifies as non-binary. And it's the first time a student has ever told me that point blank in my library. And so I showed her how to, not her, see, I'm trying to learn it. I showed them how to do a search with tags and things to find books and narrow down in our Destiny system, which I had never done before. And I think I need to do more of those to teach them how to narrow down some of their searches. But focus groups with students. Yeah, focus groups. They're going to tell you what you're missing and what you need.
Yeah,
And they'll be honest. They'll be brutally honest. Okay. Erika, did you want to say anything else about this before I move on?
No, we're good. We're good.
All right. So does a culturally responsive school library program look different in elementary versus middle and high school? I've only taught middle, so. I mean, I would think
absolutely.
Absolutely. You got different, age levels.
Developmentally. And I'll even give an example of one of my first kind of projects that I did with a school in my first year there was with 6th graders. but it was about social justice because we had been just coming off of what happened in Parkland, and they were walking out of classes. They were doing strikes across the district, or walkouts across the district, and these middle schoolers were taking part. And so it goes to show, like, I had no idea. Like, I thought that this was their first time, but these are kids who had been doing these different things in the community, right? They had been to other types of women's rights protests and things like that. And so it was really important for me to make sure that they understood what type of voices they had and what they were using them for. But they were sixth graders, and some of them were talking about sexual assault. So sorry if there's a trigger. And so I would not do that with the fifth graders in my building. They're 10 years old. And while it doesn't seem like a big age difference, these sixth graders were extremely mature. And so it's going to look different if you're talking to elementary students or using certain materials with elementary kids than you are with middle school or high school. And then when you think about high schoolers, you can pretty much, depending on the maturity level, you can pretty much step it up because they're at a different space and they want to engage in that type of dialogue. I sit and think about Dear Martin as an example, because that book is written in prose and dialogue, but that dialogue in there is what really, really intrigues the students when they're reading it as a class novel, and being able to kind of talk about what they're feeling, what they see in their own communities, what they've seen in their schools, which just takes me back to the Instagram, I don't know what to call it, but that in all those Instagram posts about what was happening at different schools. And so just being cognizant of the types of people, types of students, what their maturity level is, where they are developmentally, but also keeping a real good pulse on how your administration backs you up, right? Because you will be able to do the very most for your learners and with them when you have administrators who understand what you're doing, who are privy to what you're doing, and who trust your judgment and what you're doing with your learners.
I will say that my administrator, who I went to high school with and we worked together for 21 years, he doesn't always understand what I'm doing. And sometimes he'll roll his eyes and I'm like, but he trusts me. We've built that trust up. And I feel like I am able to, I don't want to say push the envelope, because it shouldn't be pushing the envelope just to be equitable in your library. I mean, but I feel like, there is a trust. And I think as far as differences in elementary versus middle and high school, as long as your material is age appropriate, I mean, and we're going to talk about collection development and professional reviews, but I mean, I have students who are 10 who they know they know who they are at 10. I mean, they're pretty confident in their, and they need to see themselves in the books, and there are books that they can get that are age appropriate. And so I would assume I know there's tons of elementary and high school. That's where the good stuff is, Erika, the high school, those books. That's where you get the good stuff. Now I don't want to say that there's good middle school books out there too. So that brings us into culturally responsive collection development and challenge policies. And I had mentioned earlier about the student that came in and she looked around, and my very first year in the library, Marley Diaz came out with her book. Marley Diaz Gets It Done, and I think it's in So Can You. And she was making the rounds on like The View, different talk shows. And I sat and I listened to, I saw her on like 6 different talk shows, and I would stop and just listen. And I just, it was eye-opening to me, because she had said that all she had read when she was in school were, she said, white boys and their dogs. And I started thinking about it, and I was like, thinking about the books that we taught at my school. And I'm like, she's got a point. And I started looking at her list of she uses hashtag 1,000 Black girl books. And I started looking at that list and comparing it to how many we had in our library. And we didn't. And I was, it was very eye-opening to me. And there are things out there now that diversity audits that you can do, the different, you can look and see how many books do you have about students, queer students or Black students or Hispanic students, or the authors of those, are they authentic books? Like, I want to read, if I'm reading about, and I don't even know, is it queer character? Is that okay to say? I don't even know. I'm trying to learn, y'all. And I'm like, but I want an author that I don't want somebody who's not to write a book and then tell me how. I want authenticity in the books. So get to know your collection, but follow those professional reviews. And we all have different challenge policies, but unless you live in my district and we pretend we have a challenge policy and a collection development policy, but but
that's important.
It is important, and
some people don't, and you have to do something about that.
Because it's coming. I know, like I'm watching the news about all of, these states that are, they were trying to ban Jerry Craft the other day. And I'm like, who bans Jerry Craft? If Jerry Craft would come to my school, I would roll out the red carpet for Jerry Craft. I don't understand. And so we have to use professional reviews, but for your collection, if you don't have a collection development policy, you need to get one. But we need to be looking at challenge policies right now, because as we go to being culturally responsive and relevant, and making sure we are providing resources for all students, there are going to be a set of parents and students that are going to push against that. I don't know. What do you think, Erika?
There are, but that's the importance of having those policies and making them available to the public is because you're covering yourself, right? And then people have an understanding that you're not just, oh, let me see this book, I'll just add this book. No, you are a professional. We talked about that last week at AASL. It's like, we're thinking about people don't see us as professionals, but we are, right? And you have the skill set to go. Yes, Becky. You have the skill set. You've been trained to do this job, to efficiently develop this collection for the learners that you serve on a daily basis. I was going to go somewhere else with it, but yeah, it was something else I was going to say. I might think about it later, but it was related to something you said, and then I got off on collection development policies.
I do that too. Well, let me know if you think about it.
I will.
Let's do another chat. Okay. Speaking of challenges, please share any challenges you have experienced in the chat box. Any challenge that you have faced in the chat box.
And while you do that, I just remembered what I was going to say. Don't self-censor. Yeah. Please don't self-censor.
Yes.
It is, you know your learners, you know the people that you are serving, you know what experiences they have. And if you don't know those things, now is the time to learn, right? If you are seeing kids in your building once every 2 weeks or once every 10 days on a rotation, and you don't really know what their experiences are, what are you doing in your library during that checkout time to get to know them? What's your activity that you are having them to share out with? Especially if they're not very extroverted, right? And not gonna let you know who they are. We got to make sure that we, just because, and I'm saying this because it may not be you, but there is somebody out there, believe me, I live in Tennessee, I know there's a librarian out there who censors because whatever that particular material is not something that they believe in or agree with. And that's doing a disservice to our learners.
And I tried to explain that to some of the teachers at my school. They were like, I can't believe you have, whatever book in the library. And I'm like, why can you not believe it? We have students that identify that, like, what do you not understand? And I think that comes to, again, I get angry, like, and I'm trying to tone it back a notch when I have these conversations, because I'm not going to back down, and I'm not going to self-censor, and not going to do, soft censorship in the library and all that. But I do recognize, I think Becky had said it earlier, proactive, not reactive. I don't want to polarize the community, because when I can explain it better, I try to build up the trust factor. So I say that you want to tread lightly, but then again, you don't want to, like, there's a balance. And then I'm going to look at the chat. Let's see what some people are saying that has been challenged. Genderqueer at the middle school, lawn boy. There was a huge lawn boy controversy. People were getting confused with Gary Paulson's Lawn Boy with there was like a high school or an adult book called Lawn Boy, and they,
Oh,
yeah, and then
what?
they were like, there's pedophilia in Lawn Boy, and I'm like, Gary Paulson did not write. Have you read this book? Stamped. I know. I have the book. This book is anti-racist. I've had my parents say something to me about that. They called the school board on me last year because I read Kwame Alexander's Undefeated, and it was like a huge lesson on Kadir Nelson's like beautiful artwork. And we were talking about Caldecott, like it was this whole thing, and all the parents got out of it was that I was teaching CRT and BLM, and I needed to be fired, and I'm so it's going to happen, and you need to be prepared. I'm having to learn to take deep breaths and respond in a way that won't polarize the community, and it's hard. Let's see.
But, and when you were saying something about that earlier, Amanda, it made me think, like, we have 30-second elevator pitches, right? If we were to encounter somebody who wants to know what's on our library wish list, or when we talk to somebody about the vision of our library, or when we have community members come in, you need to have a 30-second elevator pitch about that. Like, what does culturally responsive teaching and instruction look like in your library, so that you can stand apart when somebody comes to you and says something about it, like, that this is what it is, and that keeps you from being on that like polarizing side of things, because that's when they start to like nitpick even more, and they try to get you, and instead of blowing up and getting all upset the way that they want you to, you just kind of stand your ground and lay the facts out there.
And I'm sneaky about stuff. I was told that I was not allowed to have a pride display, and I was not allowed to have a Black Lives Matter display. And so, so I got a little pin and I put it, and the students saw it. You can be sneaky about stuff. The students saw it. I don't care, and kids would talk to me, and I'm not going to not talk to them about those issues when they talk to me. So I get very frustrated, as you can probably tell, but some people put some very interesting articles, and then the challenge toolkit from ALA. Thank you, Amy, for putting that in the chat. Stay calm, listen, don't use triggering terms. Becky's always got the best advice. Thank you, Becky. And then let's see, Kathy hasn't had a challenge, but several parents have challenged Ghost Boys as a class novel. So I'm seeing all these, and unfortunately, I think it's going to continue. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better as far as challenges go, just based on things that are happening in the news. Okay, so again, in the chat, please share in the chat box ways that you connect with your community. So when you are, like Erika said, you're building your elevator pitch, and because you're going to have somebody in your community ask you, how are you connecting with your community and building those partnerships? What do those partnerships look like? What kind of partnerships do you have? Who are you partnering with? And how does it benefit your program? Denise, I was also not allowed to have a banned book week display. I went around that too. It's yeah, I have to be sneaky.
Just don't put up a display and talk about it anyway. I mean,
Look,
it's important for them to know, like when I got to the middle school, like, and I know that they were taught this in elementary, but they acted like they didn't know the difference between a banned and a challenge book. And so it's one of those things you just have to, because you may talk about it once a year. So you just have to keep talking about it every year until that time.
so people are putting in the chat ways that you can connect with your community and build partnerships to benefit your program. I'm going through our notes to see how many more slides. Okay.
We have 2 more.
We're doing good on time.
I think we can do it.
All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and read some of the comments in the chat. I see weekly s'more newsletters with the announcements and all the things you're doing. Partner with 2 local independent bookstores that host author visits. Let's see. Social media has been my go-to because it's free. And my community, they are huge Facebook users, like huge. So I post anything and everything I can on Facebook. And I have somehow built up this like trust in the, like probably because I went to school with half of the people in my community, but there's like a trust. They see what I'm posting. They see what I'm doing. They see that I'm working hard for their kids, I think. So whenever I do have somebody, well, I'll talk about that when we talk about handling the hate, but I get supported, and I think it's because they see on social media. But I like the idea of the newsletter. Partnering with your public library can be key, especially, Sarah said they have wonderful online resources that we cannot afford. So true. I can't afford ebooks. I just can't, I can barely afford physical books. And so our public library gives our students e-cards so they can access on all the ebooks and audiobooks and databases and everything. And every student is automatically given a number. And I teach them first week of school how to use that number. Let's see, sharing information on the websites. Yes. The bookstore thing, we do have, I'm fortunate to have a local bookstore. Erika, I would assume in Nashville, y'all have a lot of little independent bookstores, huh? Maybe?
We have a few. We have one main, if it's okay to say a main or major independent bookstore that really pushes out the majority of what happens in the community, but we have a couple smaller scale ones as well.
We are very fortunate in my community that our bookstore, it's a husband and a wife, and they're young, and they push out a lot of content that's really great. Their book suggestions and things. They know how to work it like I do with the sneak. I don't want to say sneaky. That sounds horrible because then it comes, but they know how to navigate it without flaring things up using inflammatory verbiage, I guess. Okay, so there's a lot of great things in the chat. So I hope you look through this and get some ideas. So discussion being proactive versus reactive. Like Erika said, you need to have your elevator pitch and know what you're going to say. And you need to make those connections with your community. Don't wait to make the connections after you've already had challenges and questions about your programming, because then it kind of gets to be too late. I mean, you start to build the trust afterwards. You want to build it up at the beginning. Handling the hate can be a little hard because when I have parents that want to complain about me, I go on the defensive, and I have to watch what I say a lot. I don't want to alienate. I want to diffuse, and I'm learning how to diffuse. And I haven't learned it yet, but I'm getting a little better. Take it seriously, not personally. I like what Jenny said in the quote. Make sure you have, like, my rationale for doing blank programming is this. You know, like I have this because of this. These are my reasons why. And I can usually back it up with research. What do you think, Erica?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, and it's, I think sometimes when we say like there's another thing that we should be doing, there's another thing that we should be doing, and here's another thing. We're doing this already. Like I can guarantee you there's nobody in here. I don't know, maybe there is some rogue person. Which if you are, please call me. Because I'm not there yet. I'm halfway there. But most of us, I would bet, are already doing this thing, right? We are already coming up with a rationale behind what it is we do in our library. Why? Because most of us have been trained that whatever happens in our library should meet the vision of the school, right? If your school's vision does not include in some way, maybe not worded this way, celebrating and teaching the cultures of the students in your building, then maybe it's time to relook at that vision. And you can be that leader in the building that says, we need to take a look at this, right? Again, doesn't have to be phrased that way, but how is what you're doing in the building, whether it's in the collection, in your programs, in what you teach, where are you pulling your resources from? What are you sharing with your teachers? We are teacher leaders. We are supposed to be helping teachers as well, right? So me, I snuck in an adult collection, and the majority of the stuff that I put in that collection, ding, 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 here we are. And then I sprinkle some little leisure reading in there too. I didn't have to because they have access to the public library that just delivers stuff to the schools. However, I want my teachers to grow. I want them to grow the same way I am working to grow, to be the best and offer the best for our learners who are going to go out one day and be productive citizens, my hope.
One more Jamboard. So on the Jamboard, I'm going to click on it. Let's see, where is it at? How do you assess your school community's wants and needs? So how do you get there? Like, how do you know what your teachers need to work on? How do you know what your community needs? How are you doing that? So if you could take the Jamboard, and we are going to close this down in about 5 minutes. So I'm gonna try to be fast. While you're putting that, how do you assess your schools, your community's wants and needs? I will say situational awareness is key. And I wanted to go back to something I said earlier about when you know better, you do better, because I only learned about what a microaggression was about 2 years ago. And I just didn't know what a microaggression was. And now that I know about it, it's very evident when I see it. And it's, you know, it had to be pointed out to me. But I'll go back to when that student came in and she was walking around the library and she's like, we didn't have books. I didn't see characters that look like me. I started to get, this is horrible, but like that, stay away from that white savior vibe, because I was like, I'm saving the day. And then I was like, oh my God, that is a white savior. Stop it, Amanda, stop it. Like, I've just got to stop. So be cognizant of what you're doing. And, you know, and a friend, Donna, I have a really good friend, Donna, that works, Dr. Ramsey, she works in our school district, and she comes to talk to me. But she told me, she said, you know, Amanda, you can't rely on me to tell you everything. She said, because, she said, I'm a person of color, where you can't rely on me to you have to do the work yourself. And I do. And we all, you know, and it's just something I'm having to learn. And I can't believe I'm 43 and I just am learning about these things in the past 2-3 years. I think being involved in Twitter and in webinars like this, I've learned a lot. But I'm looking now at the Jamboard. Let's spread these out. Again, I see focus groups, and I think focus groups with your students, stakeholder surveys, and make sure you're surveying your students and your families, all the stakeholders, build those relationships, interest inventories, questionnaires, talking to the students about what they want in the library. Ask the students, the teachers, the community.
I
So
want
that's
to
all looking real
add,
good.
I know when we say the word teacher, it becomes all encompassing, but it's really important to, I'm going to stop saying really important. One of the things as a librarian that I have taken advantage of every year in my career is to make great relationships with the social workers and school counselors in my buildings. Your kids may not tell you everything. You may see things in them, but they may not give you the answer. And because they've had to get the resources from a school counselor or a social worker, those are going to be your people, right? So you can use them to lean on to help you understand what those things are that you need to pull into your curriculum. I remember into your library. And as a not so great example, a couple of weeks ago, I had to sit and have a side conversation with a table of kids in the library because I heard them make this really rude comment about the way that one of the scent of one of the other students that was walking by. And so I'm like, okay, first of all, we don't do that in here. Like, I lost it. We don't do that at all. Like, you are out of line, blah, 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 blah. And so after I go do that, then I'm like, let me tell you why, right? Because you may see that as an odor, but like, if you don't understand their culture, you don't understand what they do or how they bathe or what that looks like, right? And I said, and furthermore, you don't know if they're homeless. Maybe they don't have access. And so we have to think about all of those things and take in it. It's people get tired of me because I make it all a learning opportunity, but we're going to learn today because again, you have to go out and you're going to be the people taking care of me and making the decisions in this government. So let's make sure that we have a conscious understanding and awareness of all of the different types of cultures that are around us.
And it said final thoughts from Erika and Amanda, but I want to leave on what Erika, I want to end on what Erika just said, because that was great. I don't have anything better to say than what Erika said. So let's see. We have like maybe 2 minutes of Q&A. I don't like, so if you have a quick question, throw it out there, but this is our contact information. Or if Kristen wants to get on and I don't know what Kristen, what do you need to, I don't know.
There's no questions in the Q&A. I think we did a bad job. No one wants to learn anymore from us.
I think you've done such an amazing job, guys, thinking about how hard the road ahead is, why the road is important, and that it's okay to ask questions and reconsider and be vulnerable as you explore what is right and important for folks. So not seeing any questions. Thank you again for this special evening. And especially, I saw some notes in the chat about policies tonight. And next Monday at this time, we're going to have as speakers Becky Calzada and Rachel Altabelli, who are both district leaders in school libraries. And so they can talk more about how we deal with, how we set ourselves up to be successful when we're being vulnerable, and what those strategies might look like sort of from the board office perspective. But before we let folks go for the night, we do want to remind you that we are recruiting. So as we move forward through the research part of this project, we're going to be piloting some learning modules around these topics in summer 2022. And we'll be looking for 15 K-12 librarians from schools who are eager to deepen their own culturally responsive online instruction. And we'll have a 6-week period of 3 modules, and you'll be supported in the fall by project team members while you implement in in the fall of that year. And in exchange, you receive continuing education credits and a stipend of $800. And what I'll do next is I will put a note in the chat of how you can both apply for the cohort pilot and sign up for next week's webinar. So thank you so much. You'll remember you'll be getting a note from Liz tomorrow or the next day that has links to the certificate and the recording and everything else. So thank you. And with that, let's call it a night, folks. Have a good evening.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Erika.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure.